Good morning. I'm Cynthia Allen with the Stormwater Program at Middle Tennessee State University, and I thought I would bring a presentation for summertime fun, how we can get out and explore our streams and wildlife if you're looking for something to do this summer. These are definitely the dog days of summer. I don't know about y'all, but it is hot out there, and I've been looking for some ways to bring resources for folks who are cooped up during this pandemic and maybe trying to get outside, and sharing some resources that you can find online, especially if you're looking for wildlife and exploring in our creek beds. The overview for today is covering quickly the importance of streams in our community, how they're classified by use, imagining what we would do without these important water resources in our day-to-day lives as we go about our daily activities, and then just some fun, interactive resources that you can find online if you want to share with your family. So in our communities, we use streams in so many ways. The wildlife and birding and recreation and boating and water supply for our daily use and fishing. There's just so many things that we use our creeks for. Streams are actually classified by their use, and the Stones River classifications are for our fish and aquatic life, for recreation, irrigation, livestock watering, and wildlife navigation, and also we get our water supply from the Stones River and also from the Percy Priest Reservoir. And these are just some links to our water reports. I just thought that might be useful since we do depend on our rivers and streams for our drinking water. This is an example of some of the fun wildlife if you get out and go exploring. Turtles, otters, salamanders. Usually you'll see those a little earlier in the year, but we definitely like to encourage people to get out and enjoy the creeks and streams in their backyard or go to the greenway and just enjoy nature. We'd like to remind everybody that although it seems like we have an abundance of these surface waters, it's less than 1% of the available fresh water on the earth. So while the earth is just covered in water, many of these resources are unusable for fresh water supplies. So less than 1% are our rivers and streams, lakes. And to bring this home, because water conservation is so important and taking care of these valuable water resources, there's a quick challenge that you can do. Later I'll talk about a booklet that we're going to make available through the farmers market, but there's some at-home challenges for figuring out your personal water footprint. Waterfootprint.org is part of the Water Footprint Network, and that just can help you calculate how much you think you're using on a day-to-day basis and some unique ways to conserve that water. Every fall, there's Imagine a Day Without Water, and it just asks citizens to think, what would we do without the water supply that we have? In most of the world, they're very limited. So in the United States, we're really lucky to have the water resources that we do. And we just ask people to not take that for granted because we have droughts of our own here. And even though it's not as challenging as some of the global issues, it's nice to reflect on what we would do without water in our communities and how precious this is. One of the biggest pollution risks is just how water washes through our community. The first inch of rain carries 90% of the pollution. So that's anything from the brake dust, oils and greases, detergents, food waste, just a host of community pollution that contributes that we don't necessarily think of. And when the rain washes through our community, it goes into our storm drains, and that flows into the nearby rivers without being treated. An obvious source of pollution, one that you can see, is litter. And I thought this slide was interesting just because it shares how much litter. We usually spend around $15 million annually to pick up litter in Tennessee. And the Tennessee Department of Transportation has a program you've probably seen, Nobody Trashes Tennessee, but it's to try and bring awareness to this. And this was just a slide showing how much pounds of litter was removed each year. So we ask everybody to do their part and try and prevent any litter, secure it from blowing away while you're outside, pick up litter if you're out and about, and if you see anything, you can call the litter hotline as well. Then we want to get to the fun part and go exploring. So we have a lot of local places, Discovery Center, the Greenway, Cannonsburg, where you can get out and get into these rivers yourself. And because of the water pollution, we always ask everybody to be careful, wash your hands afterwards, and be careful of any sharp objects. Always wear shoes if you're in the creek, but go exploring, go and have some fun. This was a unique experiment that was done several years ago. David Lichtwager was a photographer, and he wanted to just set up a cube in different areas around the world and see how much life passes through this biocube in a 24-hour period. And one of the locations he picked was the Duck River. And he ended up documenting quite a few species, and it ended up listing the Duck River as one of the most diverse rivers in the world. This is a list of some of the species that he saw, but overall he noticed in that 24-hour period that 50 species of mobile fish had passed through. There was various creek bugs, these larval insects that we'll get to in a little bit, and 7 varieties of mussels, and 3 of which were on the endangered species list. So in the Duck River, since it was documented to be one of the most ecologically diverse places, we realized that's so many of our rivers locally. That could be any river, but can we keep it that way? And all of these areas are at risk for high growth and different pollution. So we know those water resources and biodiversity have amazing animals that depend on that water source, but the challenge is, as a community, can we continue to preserve these unique areas? And because we're all dependent on it, the wildlife and aquatic life is, but as you can see at the bottom of the slide, the Duck River is the sole water source for, at this time, 250,000 people in Middle Tennessee, and we know that number is just growing rapidly. So the challenge is always trying to preserve these unique areas. And in general, the majority of our biodiversity for our different kinds of wildlife are in the Southeast region. And in particularly Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia have really unique, diverse animals. And this slide just kind of breaks down how many species. Almost half of the turtle species are in this area in the United States in general. Most all of the salamanders are found here, and they're at high risk for being lost due to development. Most of our mussel species and crayfish species. So you can see why it's really important to get out and explore so that we are connected to these unique animals and wildlife, but also that once we lose these, they're not anywhere else. So it's critical that people feel connected and want to protect these areas. So that's why we want to encourage people to get out and explore. There's a ton, there's just no shortage of finding resources, but I thought this Earth Echo was kind of a fun way to print off a card at home. It's a printable bird bingo. These are some animals that you might see in our area, and have the kids or just go out and try and identify some of these birds and wildlife. Also, Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency, it has so many valuable online resources for identification. And they also have a link to the bird song. So a lot of times when you're hearing the bird and you don't know how to identify, you can get online and find out what you're seeing and hearing. And that's a link to their website. TWRA is on tennessee.gov, and you can just go to TWRA, and I encourage you to search their whole site, but I'm going to pull out a couple of key links that you might find enjoyable. So this is the birds. They also have the turtles. You can identify a host of the turtles that you're seeing out in nature. the amphibians. They have a great page on some of the amphibians that you don't normally see. And they also have the Tennessee Amphibian Monitoring Program, TAMP, and they've got some great resources there. And on the Frogs and Toads of Tennessee, you can also click on and hear what those sounds are, so you can start to identify them by their sounds as well. We do have 21 species of frogs and toads. Here's also a link to the fish guides. We have a lot of fishermen, and fishing is a really important resource and economic value to our state. And they've got some great tips on different fish and identifying fish and getting your fishing license. But all of these have one basic need, and that's their food source. So the creek bugs are the food source for so many of these higher species of wildlife. So our fish, our raccoons, our otters, they're all dependent on a lot of this diversity of food. And in order for that to thrive, they need their habitat. So these corridors along the stream bank for vegetation, that's the riparian habitat, and that's where a lot of times you'll find these species. But also we encourage people to protect the stream bank by doing these streamside plantings. Let your grass grow up a little bit higher at the stream bank so that it provides the habitat for these species to survive. This is an example of that riparian area. And every year, the city of Murfreesboro and MTSU and Rutherford County usually partner together to provide trees and shrubs that the city of Murfreesboro purchases to preserve these valuable areas. And this is just a section of the plantings and the different zones that you would find in that area, and how to diversify that with the different plant species so that you encourage a variety of different aquatic and wildlife in that area. I also wanted to go back and say that a lot of these native species have deeper root systems, and that helps to hold the soil in place to prevent the erosion too. So as well as habitat, these also are important areas to protect from pollution, chemical runoff from our yards, and hold the soil in place and protect that stream bank. So as we mentioned, the aquatic bugs are important for the food supply, but they also tell us about the water quality. Many of these bugs are pollution sensitive. So what we see are a variety of species that will die off if pollution is too high. They're just not tolerant enough to survive high pollution. And also many of these, their life cycle is dependent on these grasses. And as you can see, like a dragonfly starts its life out in the water, and then it emerges later to become the dragonfly that we're used to seeing. But that life cycle is dependent on these grasses and other habitat that's critical to ensure the survivability of these species. So there's an interactive activity that you can do. We encourage people to get out in the stream, pick up the rocks, dig around and see what you can see. If you're interested in doing that, I'll show some online resources. This is just a fun activity that I can email if anybody's interested. It's kind of determining, is your stream clean, by seeing some of the animals that you would find in nature, and then kind of classifying them by a score to determine how much diversity is there. And also from the outcomes of that, you can determine what's the water quality based on how likely they are to survive if they're not tolerant to polluted water. Many of our species that we really enjoy, the dragonflies and the ones that help us keep the mosquito larvae in check, they are really sensitive to pollution, and so they're not very tolerant and they'll die off. So a lot of times when you have that diversity, you have less of the nuisance, like the leeches and the mosquitoes. So that diversity helps keep those in check also. So this is an online resource that you can go to that has some great pictures for these macroinvertebrates. They call them macro because you can see them with your eye. and then benthic because they live on the bottom of the stream. And this Stroud Center has an interactive activity that you can go to. So if you're a teacher, if you're doing some of the homeschooling during this pandemic, this is a great website for a lot of different resources with some really good imagery. And it's also got an ID key so that when you're out, you can print that out or take it on your mobile phone and use it while you're there in the stream. There's some water testing that you can do. The Stones River Watershed Association that me and many of us with these programs are involved with, they're purchasing these small kits so that citizens can do some water testing in their backyard. These are free, so if you're interested, just email me. And we just encourage you to go online to Earth Echo as part of their global challenge. It lets you register your site and go in regularly and input your information. And this is done with a part of the global challenge every March. But we encourage people to do that on a regular basis, whatever's convenient for you if you get the kit. But it's a way to see what's going on in the river. There are also lesson plans online, printouts that you can do. So this Earth Echo has so many online resources that you can use. It's kind of a one-stop quick shop. If you want to participate in that, let me know and we can get a kit to you. The sampling is very simple. If folks end up getting more interested, there are much more sensitive testing that can be done and we can work with them. But this is just kind of a basic one to get people used to getting out in the stream and seeing what's there. They test for turbidity, which shows the amount of particulates and sediment in the stream, and temperature, dissolved oxygen, and the pH. And a lot of these are, if they're out of balance, they'll affect the health and the life of the aquatic animals in there. So even though this is a basic testing and very simple to do, it's really important baseline information for the health of our streams. The city does a lot of this testing and they have some great resources online if you just are interested in this topic in general. Here's just a couple links, but all throughout the Murfreesboro website are links to some of the studies and reports they've done, habitat, some of the karst dye tracings that they have done. So I just wanted to point that out, that the city of Murfreesboro has some really good resources as well. And if you live near a stream, they've got an interactive map online where you can hone in on your particular area. Or if there's a stream that you go to regularly, you can drill down on that too. And then people get out and get on the water in the boats, and we just always encourage people to have safe boater practices. And there are so many resources online. Many people are getting out and kayaking, but even though our rivers aren't very deep and they're not always a swift current, there are traps that can be in there as things wash down the river. So we ask everybody to always go through boater education before they get on the water. Know your limits. The river's never the same from day to day. It changes, especially after a rain. A lot of times rain can impact the flow up to 3 or 4 days after. So definitely check the gauges, the stream gauges through the USGS. Army Corps of Engineers has some great resources, and the Coast Guard has some great resources. If you're paddling, AmericanCanoe.org is full of different resources. So there are so many online links that we just really encourage people to make sure they're safe when they're out on the water. Safety is always priority one. Your life jackets, never get on the water without your life jacket. So when you go exploring, don't sacrifice safety at the expense of your curiosity. I'm going to put some of these activity books at the farmers market. There, when you walk in, they've got that display counter in the hallway, and I'm going to try and keep these stacked throughout October. I'm going to try and get out there weekly and make sure that there's activity books. But we developed this book in partnership with Project Wet. It's a 16-page activity booklet that's just full of information about our local watersheds, some of the wildlife. Each page has some kind of an activity. So if you're doing homeschooling, this is a great resource to take home and use. These are correlated to the standards, and I'll get those to you if you're a educator or if you're homeschooling. They are correlated to the state education standards to help you with your schooling education. But it's also a great resource just to learn more about the waters and the special places unique to Tennessee. This is my contact information if you want any of these resources or you're interested in learning more. And reach out anytime, even if you have some other topics. But we just want to encourage people to get out and play. Summertime is such a fun time, and I know everybody's been cooped up with this pandemic. So everybody stay safe and hopefully go exploring.